Welcome at Pizza and More. To which party do you belong? To the party of dry yeast or to the party of fresh yeast? I'm Jürgen and we make today two different doughs, one with dry yeast and one with fresh yeast, because I want to see, is there really a difference between a dough made with dry yeast or with fresh yeast? The dry yeast, and you may know if you watch my videos, I use normally dry yeast. The dry yeast has some really big advantages. The first of the big advantages of dry yeast is that it's longer durable. So the best before date is far longer than with fresh yeast. This is pretty clear because fresh yeast, to produce dry yeast, they remove the water out of the fresh yeast and then we have dry yeast. And that's the reason why the duration time for dry yeast is far longer than fresh yeast. It's also a bit easier to handle because normally the dry yeast is only put to the ingredients of the dough together with the flour normally, and then you mix everything up and it's done, compared to the fresh yeast where normally it's required to make a pre-dough. The dry yeast is easy to make portions from. Well, easy. We definitely need a precision scale. Without a precision scale, it's very difficult because if we need, for example, 0.7 grams of yeast or 0.6 grams of dry yeast, this is impossible to measure without a precision scale. So we need a precision scale, but then it's pretty easy because we balance it, we put it into the bowl and mix it up and it's done. For the fresh yeast, normally we say the fresh yeast has more power. So the dough rises better, rises more than with dry yeast. And the taste and the smell of fresh yeast is far more extensive than with dry yeast. Especially if you make pastry, if you make some dough with yeast for sweet things, there is the huge taste of yeast really required and wanted, because there we want that the pastry or that thing tastes like yeast. This is not really required if we make pizza, and in a pizza we have a very small amount of yeast, and so therefore there is this taste or this smell of yeast not that heavy than in a sweet yeast dough. If we have some leftover fresh yeast, it's also pretty easy. We can freeze fresh yeast. It lasts around about 6 months in the freezer, but after 6 months there is the possibility that the fresh yeast loses then its power and the dough might not anymore rise that heavily as with a fresh yeast. The relationship between dry yeast and fresh yeast is pretty easy. It's 1:3. So 1 gram of dry yeast equals 3 grams of fresh yeast. If you have maybe some dry yeast and it's a bit older, because during the time the older a dry yeast is, the less power it has. So therefore, there is the possibility to make a test. If there is still enough power in this dry yeast, we take some lukewarm water, add roundabout or a little bit of sugar, then roundabout a half teaspoon of dry yeast. We mix it up, let it rest for around 10 minutes, and if it starts bubbling, the yeast is still active and we can use this yeast. If there is nothing in the water, then the yeast is dead and we have to throw it away and buy a new one. But this is now everything to yeast. Now to the dough. I make today with both kinds of yeast my most preferred dough. So this is the dough with a 50% BIGA. The total leavening time of the dough will be around 72 hours. So 48 hours for the BIGA and then 24 hours for the main dough. At the end, of course, we bake some pizza because we want to see, is there a real difference or is there no difference? The hydration I will make is 65%. If you are more interested in my most preferred dough, I will write the link to this video because I made already a video of it. I will link the video, or I will make the video into the video description, and in the video description you will find, as in each other videos as well, the whole recipe, what I make today, and the whole procedure also in the video description. And now we start with the BIGA. There are now all the ingredients we need for the BIGA. Here in the middle you need to think, here is the border. So each of those ingredients are for 2 times a BIGA. Here I have 2 times 250 grams of strong flour. I have here 2 times 125 grams of cold water. And here there are 0.6 grams of dry yeast. And here are 1.8 grams of fresh yeast. And now I make a BIGA of all those ingredients. I made now the BIGA from both different ingredients. Here in the bigger box there is the BIGA made with the fresh yeast, and here in the smaller box there is the BIGA made with the dry yeast. Now I let the BIGA rest for around 1 to 2 hours at room temperature, and then I put it into the fridge for around 48 hours. The BIGA is now 48 hours old. There is actually absolutely no difference in the BIGA if the BIGA was made with dry yeast or if this BIGA was made with fresh yeast, but this is exactly what I have expected. Because the BIGA settles during this time, it is very compact. It's, as I said, it's simply settled. There is absolutely no difference, and this is normal. A BIGA will never raise. The only difference, what I can not what I can see, what I can smell is this BIGA, which was made with dry yeast, is absolutely neutral, and this BIGA, which was made with the fresh yeast, has a nice smell. I smell a bit, a smell like Hefe, like yeast, but really great. It's exactly fantastic, and the result so far is exactly what I expected and totally the same. These are the ingredients what we need right now for our main dough. We have here 2 times our 48 hours BIGA. We have here our flour. This flour has a medium baking strength. This is the other 50% of our flour. It is 250 grams. Then we have here water which with a temperature of around 4 degrees Celsius. These are 200 grams, and this will lead at the end then to a hydration of 65%. We have here 2 times fine sea salt, each 15 grams, and we have here our yeast. On one side the dry yeast, 0.5 grams, and on the other side 1.5 grams of fresh yeast. And out of all these ingredients I will make now our main dough. If you are interested how to make the main dough, please have a look at the video which is in the video description. Both doughs are now kneaded. There was absolutely no difference in kneading, so both doughs are absolutely identical. Of course, this dough which I made from fresh yeast or with fresh yeast has a better smell. It smells a bit stronger, more like yeast, but this is absolutely normal as the fresh yeast has far more smell as the other one, as the dry yeast. I will let the dough rise now for around 2 hours at room temperature, and after this period of time I will put it into the fridge for around 10 hours. And from now on, in 12 hours roundabout, I will make the pizza boys. The dough rose now for around 12 hours. I would say from a smell, there is not a real difference anymore. Both are smelling really great, like a normal dough made with yeast. From the size, I would say maybe the dough with fresh yeast rose a little bit more than the other one, but I will show you these doughs right now. There is now in a direct comparison the both doughs. On this side here you can see this is the dough which I made with the fresh yeast, and this is the dough I made with dry yeast. And of course, I hope you can see it on the video as well, this dough has a bit more volume than this one, but both doughs are looking really great. Now I make pizza boys out of the dough, from each 3 pizza boys, and they will have a weight of around 280 to 290 grams. I won't show in detail right now how to create those pizza boys, because this video is the comparison between fresh and dry yeast, and how to make the pizza boys in detail I showed already in several other videos, so please check out these other videos. Maybe you know it already. While creating the pizza boys from both doughs, I discovered really no big difference. The only difference what I really saw was that in this dough, which I made from fresh yeast, was far more air inside. But during creating the pizza boys, most of the air is already gone out. But let's see how the dough develops. Now it's very important to close the lid again from both boxes, and then I put both boxes directly back into the fridge, and there I let it for, let's say, to 5 to 6 hours before baking. I will take them out of the fridge, and so that they get back to room temperature and have the possibility to rise again. And then we will bake a pizza and see how it goes. 5 hours ago I took the dough out of the fridge, and both doughs look really absolutely fantastic. Both grow absolutely great. Maybe the dough which I made from fresh yeast is a bit bigger than the other one, but both doughs are looking really fantastic. I will show you both right now, then you can have your own look and your own opinion. Here we have now both doughs. This one is made with the fresh yeast, this one is made with the dry yeast. Here you can see they are a bit thicker, or they have a bit more volume. These one are a bit more shiny, but I think maybe it is also the reason that they have 2 different boxes. This could also be the case, but I would say the result of both those is really great, and they are really comparable. And from the dough's perspective right now, it makes really no difference if this is fresh yeast or if this is dry yeast. But now I will make the pizza. This pizza right now is made from the dough with the dry yeast. From a stretching perspective, it was absolutely fantastic. No issues, everything worked like expected. And now it's time for the oven. This is now the pizza which is prepared from the dough with fresh yeast. I have to say everything worked fantastic, so stretching worked perfectly, but I have to say there is 0 difference to the dough made with dry yeast. And now it's time for the oven. Here we can see right now both pizzas in the direct comparison. This one is this which I made with the fresh yeast, and this one is made with dry yeast. And if you would ask me, I would not see any difference which one is made from which kind of yeast. Both are crispy, both are looking great. Now let's double check the air pockets. And here we check right now if there is really air inside the crust, and we can see there is air inside of the crust, and it's really soft in the middle, full of air. This is exactly how we want a Neapolitan pizza. This pizza made with dry yeast looks exactly the same. If you have a look here, the dough is in the center really soft with lots of air pockets, exactly like we want also this kind of pizza. So far there was not a real difference. Making the dough, up to now everything was exactly the same. Okay, the dough with fresh yeast had a bit more volume because there was a little bit more air inside, but after baking I have to say there is really no difference. Both crusts rose very well. Both those crusts, both crusts look absolutely fantastic, and therefore I have to say I can't see any difference if this is dry yeast or fresh yeast. Maybe there is some difference in the taste, and that's the reason why I will taste right now, but only the crust, because in the center it will taste the same. This is what I definitely know, and now I will taste the crust. As first from the pizza with the fresh yeast, this tastes fantastic. There is no special taste from the yeast. It tastes like a normal fantastic pizza crust should taste. And now I taste the other one with the dry yeast. And also from this pizza, I have to say the crust tastes exactly the same. So my opinion is there is no special difference from dry yeast to fresh yeast. The taste is really the same, the handling is the same, stretching is the same. So my opinion is everybody should really use this kind of yeast, which is the best for everyone. If you want to use fresh yeast, use fresh yeast. If you want to use dry yeast, then use dry yeast. I will, of course, if I have fresh yeast at home, maybe from some sweet yeast dough, then it could be that I take also for the pizza fresh yeast, but normally you will see in my following videos as well the usage of dry yeast. I think there is no difference, so I will continue with the dry yeast. If you like my video, it would be fantastic if you would subscribe my channel, and then we see us also in the next video. Ciao.